Hey everyone, it's Chyrstyn. Welcome back to Twin Talks Ballet. Today I am joined by Chyrstyn Fentroy, who is a soloist dancer with the Boston Ballet. And Chyrstyn very kindly agreed to join us today on the channel to speak about her experience as a dancer of color in this predominantly white field. And also she's going to share some of her insights on what all dancers can start to do in order to make the ballet world a more inclusive, representative, and really safe and honoring space for dancers of color. So thank you very, very much for sharing your perspective and your time with us.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, first, I would like to ask you just about your background and really what you're doing professionally today.
So I am currently with the Boston Ballet, as you mentioned before. Prior to joining Boston Ballet, I danced for 5 years with a company called the Dance Theater of Harlem, which is located in the neighborhood of Harlem of New York. They are a predominantly African-American company. They were created after the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. and Arthur Mitchell, who was a former dancer with New York City Ballet, a Black man, and one of the first, I'd say, dancers of color in the United States. He created the company with Carol Shucks. So I spent 5 years with that company, learned a lot about who I am as an artist and as, I guess you could say, an activist, or just an understanding of who I am as a person and where I belong in the arts there. And then I decided to step out from there after 5 years and joined Boston Ballet. I joined the Boston Ballet as an artist. The year after that, I was a second soloist, and I'm now a soloist.
That's wonderful. And I'm so happy to hear about your experience with Dance Theater of Harlem. I had the privilege of seeing that company perform in Utah, and I was just so inspired, not only by the repertoire, but of course the dancers and just, the story that the company is telling in this industry that, again, it's predominantly white with this European aesthetic. So that's really wonderful. Second, I'd like to ask you, in what ways do you believe your skin color has impacted your experience as a dancer?
I think that it's given me a lot of perspective. I have to acknowledge that I am biracial, and that has kind of, in many ways, opened my eyes to different perspectives from either end. In being with Dance Theater of Harlem, I had experiences where I felt like my color wasn't dark enough, but there were also experiences where I felt like I don't know, I feel like it went both ways. And so I think that I've experienced things that maybe people that aren't of color haven't experienced. I've experienced these microaggressions that you hear about. I was pushed into like auditioning for Ailey or going to the Ailey school as opposed to pursuing a career in ballet. The reason why I joined Dance Theater of Harlem was because that was a company that was constantly mentioned to me growing up as a place that I would belong and I would fit in.
Yeah.
And as a family in a home, and looking back on that, I kind of feel a little bit differently about where those comments were coming from, but ultimately I'm grateful because I ended up in a great place and I grew a lot because of it. So I think just being exposed to the hurt that the ballet world carries, the systemic racism that the ballet world has kind of enforced and continues to enforce in some ways. I think I've just experienced that because of my skin tone.
Yeah, which hopefully we're on the road to changing that, but I'm so grateful that you're open to talking about this experience. And I do want to acknowledge, as you and I have talked about, that this is exhausting to keep revisiting, and it's really significant and generous of you and important that you're shedding light on this, because it's very easy for people who look like me to just be like, oh, well, bummer, or just kind of like turn a blind eye rather than to empathize and to listen.
Yeah, I think it's really common for people to kind of sit back and wait for the action to be done around them and then claim that action was done, as opposed to actually taking steps forward to helping the cause.
Yes, yes. Next, I'd like to ask you, What differences did you notice in your experience as a dancer of color versus what you saw your white peers experiencing in ballet?
I think that for me anyway, it's more um, realizing that some things aren't going to come as easily for me as it can for them. Something that's a very obvious example would be like, would I ever be cast as the waltz girl in Serenade? Because
Mm.
could I put my hair in a French twist, spin around on stage, lose all these pins, and then have my hair not look like Marge Simpson afterwards? You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yes.
And also just like as far as those things go, the preparation that goes into those kinds of things, like the work that I have to put into my appearance, as far as hair goes.
Hmm.
So I think it's the work that I have to put in that's a little bit different. It's the understanding that there will always kind of be this imposter syndrome that's kind of embedded in my mind that like, am I here because I am a light-skinned person of color? Am I like a cop out?
Mm.
Uh, am I getting featured and promoted because I'm a woman of color and not because of my talent and my merits? Um, so I think my insecurities lie in different places than I think others might. And most of my insecurities in my career and in my dancing are focused around things that involve me being a woman of color, the physicality of my body, my hair, my look, my skin tone. I'm a very muscular person, and I think that that's a common gene for people of color. We just develop muscles differently. And so, yeah, I think for me anyway, it's just where my insecurities lie and where my fears lie.
Mm. Which I imagine if peers around you don't share those insecurities, it can feel isolating
Yeah,
because a part of ballet culture is, at least amongst dancers, many of us, it is a very hard lifestyle. And there are so many insecurities that dancers, no matter what they look like, face. And I've noticed a big part of culture between dancers as peers is venting, sharing, and saying, "Oh my gosh, this is what's going on. This is how I'm feeling." And then other dancers saying, "Oh yeah, girl, me too." I imagine that's difficult to not have that. "Oh yeah, girl, me too."
yeah, well, and also I think it was a little bit shocking because Dance Theater of Harlem was my first professional company.
Mhm.
I was exposed to that relationship and that community, that sense of understanding that we've like been there, and like I can take my hair out after a performance and no one's gonna mock me or like make not mock me, but like
Yeah.
make a about how funny it looks because we all look like that and it's normal. Um, and then but coming into a place where I have to build a level of trust before I become comfortable taking my hair out after a performance in front of other people. And yeah, it was a little like, it was definitely, I had a learning curve for sure. And it was a little shocking, but I also think that my experience here has been mostly positive with Boston Ballet, and the people that work in the company are very open to learning and accepting each other.
Well, that is encouraging. We could
Yeah.
say, "Yay for that." That is something. Uh, Next, what are some of the more subtle ways that you've seen racism creep into the ballet world?
Um, I think it kind of rears its head with ballets that were created many, many years ago. It's less common to see kind of racist tendencies in the newer ballets that are created because they tend to represent the world that we live in today. But like restagings of old ballets that were not created for people of color and are have only been looked at in one way, sometimes kind of reinforces this like the racist tendencies of ballet. So having people come in and typecast ballets. So I've heard stories of people not being put in classical roles because they're too dark for them. Um, I've and the same thing goes to like Waltz Girl and Serenade, or like performing Balanchine's Chaconne, where all of the women start with their hair down. Um, it, will I get cast in those kinds of things? I don't know. It depends on the stager, I think. And then also, I think that sometimes with these like typecasts, it kind of opens the door to comments to be made and ignored. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, yes, definitely. And already with ballet culture being a pretty submissive one, dancers are expected to just kind of hear frankly atrocious things and then to just kind of nod your head and keep doing your job. Um, Especially when comments are being made that are insensitive towards your racial identity. That must be really hard to decide within yourself, do I take this?
It
Where
can
is
be
the line,
it can be really hard, and like you said, super isolating. Not only to like feel that and to have that internal conflict of can I say something, but then also being in a room full of people who also didn't say anything. I don't know. Sometimes
Yeah.
it can really not sit well because you don't know if they're not saying anything because they don't want to or because they don't recognize it.
Yeah. And especially if everyone's just quiet, you're just left to guess. Um, or I'm sure to question um, maybe how valid your own thoughts are,
Exactly. Yeah. And
which
it goes
that's hard.
back to the imposter syndrome of back into that. Am I making all of this up? Am I here for the right reasons?
Yeah, which is frankly, those types of questions are questions. I think it's so important that you bring light to that because those are questions I've never had to ask myself as a white dancer about my identity in this way. So thank you for kind of letting us into your head in that way, because I really hope for dancers watching, I imagine it brings about more empathy and more understanding and maybe just more awareness to kind of like if dancers watching do have a peer who is Black or brown in their company, I encourage anyone to just observe, to be aware, to maybe ask yourself questions as a white dancer, like how is my Black or brown friend experiencing this right now, and
Mhm.
maybe starting conversations on that if it's appropriate. I don't know. Obviously, I'm also here to listen and learn. I certainly don't have the answers, and I'm probably getting so little of this right, but at least
Well,
having empathy and awareness, like I know that's good.
I think that's like kind of where our responsibilities lie, though, is like holding each other accountable,
Yeah.
holding ourselves accountable for the comments that we make. I mean, this isn't just for like Black and brown people. This goes for
Hmm.
homophobic comments and comments about other races and
Yeah.
other cultures. It's really a conversation of accountability and creating a culture where people can feel comfortable to speak up.
You are so right. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me and us, like, it's not just about skin color. Like, this can really be a transferable way of thinking to anyone who has been told they don't fit that mold. So next, and I'm gonna read my questions. I was telling Chyrstyn, I'm not on Oprah's level yet of interviewing skills, so I'm gonna read my questions. So even before the recent events have caused racial injustices to come to the forefront of our attention, what do you think of some of the efforts that ballet companies have already made to support diversity?
I think that they aren't enough. And I can only truly speak on behalf of the companies that I've worked for or that I have like some sort of understanding of what they've done behind the scenes. Because at the end of the day, like I can say how I feel about what I see up front, but I don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I don't know what work they're putting on that they're not being transparent about. But I also think that that's another conversation to be had. I think that companies should be transparent about the work they are putting forward. There's nothing to hide and there's nothing to be ashamed of if you're standing up for this. So as far as like Boston Ballet goes, I think that they are making a huge effort into trying to be more inclusive and diverse. I think that I think that it maybe comes, a lot of this, not just with Boston Ballet, but a lot of things come from a place of ignorance and but wanting to do the right thing and just not knowing the appropriate steps to be made, and the fear of taking a misstep. I understand how scary that can be. As an individual, I can't imagine how it would be for an entire organization. um, there is this like inclusivity project that's been happening over the last couple of years, headed by Dance Theater of Harlem and an organization called International Association of Blacks in Dance. They hold a conference every year, I believe. I think it's annually, and it's in a different location every year, where they actually have an audition for dancers, specifically for dancers of color. They bring directors and of companies and also schools in to look at this audition, to try to make to diversify their roster and to come into the communities of people that maybe can't come into their community on their own, like can't afford to fly out to Boston or whatever.
Yeah.
So Boston Ballet is a part of that. Maybe not directly with IABD, but it's all hosted by the same people, and so the initiatives are the same. And there's something like 23 companies, I might have that number wrong, that are a part of this group. So I think that is a start, and I think that they are kind of helping guide the way into taking the next steps. I think that it's also really easy to be like, for companies to be like, we hired a Black person. None.
Whoa, right? One Black person. Yeah.
So I think that things are being done, but there's still a lot more work to do. And until we are in a place where we don't have to have these conversations anymore, then we still have work to do. And these conversations are far, far, far from over.
Absolutely. And I imagine this change will also come with who the consumers of ballet are. Changing audiences, changing stories to attract different audiences. Obviously, there are so many different forces that come into play with who companies are trying to market to and to please, and therefore what choices they make within their organizations, what their dancers look like, the stories they promote, all these things. So obviously, this is a very complex issue, but I trust and I really hope that we continue to engage with it and really to seek answers, and to seek the perspective of dancers of color rather than, white leadership just saying, I think this is a good idea. I think this is best. Let's just do this, So anyway, next question. What do you want fellow non-Black dancers to know about your experience, and what can they do to contribute to making the ballet world a more inclusive place?
I think this kind of circles back to the conversation of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it all kind of starts again from like creating a safer culture in ballet, where people can feel like they can speak up, without the fear of repercussions. That's a huge part of ballet, is like just being afraid, am I going to lose my job if I say something, and that's not okay. So that's a place that the entire community needs to start. But once we get to a place where we can hold people accountable for their actions, it can be the dancers speaking up on behalf of their friends of color who maybe feel more powerless. And I think that as far as like my experiences that I would want to share, or I would want them to understand, is that as dancers of color, we are placed in this again, this box or this frame of what we are allowed to do. These microaggressions are put into play, to whether consciously or not, to remind us that like, you can only go to Dance Theater of Harlem because you're Black. You can only go to Ailey because you're Black. Maybe you should try Chyrstyn Ballet because they have Lauren Anderson. Maybe. And or like, you should do contemporary dance. You
Yeah.
should do lines. Things like that.
Mm.
But like, it's like people's minds are limiting their minds are limiting us to where we fit. I've never seen this type of person in this company before, so there's no way that you could be there. um, so it's like understanding that no matter how hard you work or what work you produce, what your merits are, um, it'll always be overshadowed by the color of your skin in one way or another. um, or it's the same thing as like I don't know if you've ever heard someone say this before, but one of the stereotypical like microaggressions of black people get is like, you're so well spoken, or like, wow, you speak so
I've
well.
heard that.
Yeah, and it's because people see black people and they assume that they are from a neighborhood where they aren't educated,
Yeah. It's coming from this assumption that's really damaging, even though the person who says that is probably like, wow, I'm saying this really nice thing. But
Right.
the assumption is so clear.
Yeah. And so the same thing goes for dancers. It's like, wow, you're so good at contemporary dance. Or like if someone says like, it's because they're trying to remind you that that's like where your place is. Or if someone like is shocked by your ability to do classical ballet, it's because they wouldn't think that someone like you could do that.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's something that is really important to understand when talking to other dancers of color. Their experiences are different than yours. Their work, as much as I hate to say that they have to work harder, they have to work harder because there are more than just the physical limitations that everyone else has that they have to overcome.
Hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you have to work to become an exception
Exactly.
rather than to meet a standard that's already calling your name and it's
Yeah,
already made for you.
and mental part of all of that, and that alone is a battle. That's why there are so many people of color that suffer with depression and anxiety, but that's also like another cultural thing that is not it's not really okay to talk about as a person of color, and it's just starting to be okay to talk about.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that go into it.
Yeah. And that was really eye-opening to have you mention compliments you get. And one thing that might be helpful to shed more light on is for white dancers watching, this probably doesn't mean don't give your peers compliments. Just
Absolutely.
question what assumption or kind of where that compliment is coming from. Is it coming from um, a damaging assumption that you've had, or um, your black peer really surpassing a very low expectation you had for them? Or just kind of challenge where that compliment is coming from and see if you can still honor your peers' abilities and their talents and their efforts without making it clear what box you're putting them in.
And if you can't see the box that you are putting them in, then maybe offer a more specific compliment. Maybe be
Mhm.
like, your turns are getting so much better, or like, look at how high you're jumping today, or something like that. And like be a little more specific and less general.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, because personally, as a white dancer, I love encouraging my peers. I love just saying when I see something good, but I know for sure I have probably done things like this and said things like this, especially when I was younger. And so, um, and I remember when I started to become aware, a little bit more aware of things that are nice to say and actually like really not nice to say, um, I got really scared. And so, and that tension and that fear can just lead to a total freeze of, well, maybe I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just not going to engage, or I'm just going to be so careful and tiptoeing around everything that I'm not even being myself. I'm not even being an actual friend.
Well, I think it's also healthy to develop your relationships in a way where you can have that conversation.
Yeah.
So if you're not a person of color and you want your friend to be able to tell you that that something you said was offensive without you being defensive. So you tell them, like, hey, if I ever have said anything to you that might have come across the wrong way, or you might have taken it as a microaggression, please tell me so that I can change it in the future. And then for the people of color, it's like, you have to be okay with challenging people. It's scary on both ends, but like, without this conversation, nothing's going to change. You'll never know when you're hurting someone. The person that's hurting you will never know that they've hurt you, you know?
Yeah, open up that door for honesty, so that there can be respect.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So next, what do you think, or what would you like leaders to do within ballet companies in order to truly support inclusion and equal opportunity for dancers of color?
I think that there are a lot of plans that are thought of and that are talked about, but they need to really start acting on the change that they are talking about making. And this is not something that like we can just kind of coast along with. This is something that we need to be actively working towards. Like, I know that every organization and every person on the planet have a million things to do in their life and in whatever it is that they have to do. But this is not something that we can just pass on. We have to be like actively working to make change. So diversifying your staff, more than just the dancers, the artistic staff. Like, how many ballet companies have artistic directors or ballet masters of color? Like, really? Boston Ballet doesn't. Exactly. And that would be so important and so valuable as far as creating an environment that dancers of color would feel comfortable going into. If you have someone of color, like someone that represents you in the front of the room that you know has experienced maybe some of the things that you have and that has your back in that way. So diversifying like the staff, but it also goes further than just like the artistic directors and ballet masters and whatnot, but the teachers in the school and the people that work in the front desk, and so that when people come into the building, they already know from their first steps that this is an inclusive environment.
Mm.
From there, creating again the culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, and not offering repercussions for people who are standing up for their rights. It sounds so stupid and like so obvious, but I can't comprehend how someone could be upset with someone for being like, something racist was said today and this is what it was, and then
Yeah, it's shocking how that's still an ideal within the ballet world.
yeah, but and it goes like also into like body shaming and like all these other things, like ballet culture is horrible for those kinds of things. It's really hard to be outside of this cookie cutter image of a ballerina, or so yeah, I think diversifying our staff and the people that are in the forefront of your organization so that your community sees that this is an open environment that everyone is welcome in. Creating a culture where people can talk and not be afraid for their careers, and acting on the things that you talk about, not just talking about them.
Amen. Yes. Now, what do you think dancers can do within their schools or companies to advocate for diversity and inclusion and to really keep leadership accountable for providing opportunities to peers?
I think that this kind of goes into planting seeds and allowing those seeds to grow. So it's something that I talk about a lot when it comes into like community work. I think that companies need to go out into their community and show them that they're welcome in their building, because it is a scary, like, I think if I grew up in Roxbury, for example, I don't know that I would feel comfortable walking into the Boston Ballet building. It just would be like a really intimidating environment, and especially with like the history of racism in Boston. But going out into the community and planting these seeds and just getting even just one of them to want to come into your building and start to take class, and nourishing them and making them feel loved and welcome. And then that person will go back, that like child will go back and tell their friends, and then their friends will want to come, and then those friends will tell those friends, and then the whole thing just kind of like blossoms into this beautiful, like, diverse culture. And I think the way that like students and even like teenage students can do that is just telling their peers that they sharing their experiences with their peers, their positive ones, not only their negative ones, but their positive ones too. Yeah.
I mean, that does sound like a fantastic start, and honestly, something that all dancers can do to make the ballet world a more welcoming place. And even going back to one of the first things you said about um, how you were encouraged as a younger dancer to go to a company that is known for being a Black company, or saying, oh, you should check out Lions, you should check out Ailey. It brought up the idea of how important belief is, because for so many kids, or for literally anybody, you're not going to pursue things outside of your realm of what you believe is possible for you, or even if not possible, like suitable,
Right.
probable for you. And so belief is really huge. And kids aren't going to believe that they can even come into a building if it really looks like, oh, that's not where people who look like me go. I'm, Black dancers, they're not ballerinas. They're contemporary dancers. And so even for all of us to contribute to kind of a societal shift in belief of what it can look like to be a dancer, um, where Black dancers do belong in the ballet world. Just shifting that belief and expressing belief can be so life-changing, especially for a young dancer.
Yeah, and in like going to these communities and showing them that they're welcome, um, those are the people that need the scholarships. Those are the people that need the funding to help them continue their training. Ballet is not an inexpensive art form. And if I was on scholarship most of my training, then I definitely wouldn't be where I am today. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how far I would have gotten if my family, because I don't come from a wealthy family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think that's another thing that ballet companies have to recognize and accept, is that change is not going to be inexpensive, and it's not going to be free. You have to dedicate some of your funding towards that, and you have to be okay with maybe pulling away from paying for a super expensive choreographer and dedicating a little bit more time into your community and diversifying your roster. Take the money of a very expensive choreographer and give it to a choreographer of color. How many of those are there? Not many in ballet companies.
Right, I remember like Keon Gaines,
Right.
P&B.
So Boston Ballet did have an African American man creating a ballet for us this year, Stephen Galloway, but it was in the program that ended up getting canceled because of the pandemics. It got moved to next year, so it's still happening.
Okay,
Yeah. And it's refreshing to have someone of color in the front of the room. It's so, I don't know, it feels so unique, and I hate to see it that way. And so we need to change that.
yeah.
I think it's like taking the funds from, maybe choreographer is like not the best example of where they should pull their funds from, but like, or maybe it is, I don't know. But it's understanding that it's not going to be inexpensive.
Yeah, but a worthy price of paying.
A worthy price of paying, and it's something that needs to be done, and that doesn't mean that this is going to be an incredibly expensive project forever, because I think once the ballet world becomes more inclusive, then maybe the funding behind schooling might change eventually, or once it, I don't know. I honestly don't know much about the funding in ballet companies, but I guess my point is just that they need to recognize that it's not inexpensive, but it's also not something that can be ignored.
Absolutely. So last question, what do you think it could look like for ballet to truly become diverse as an art form? And how do you think highlighting or even normalizing the inclusion of dancers of color could actually benefit our art form as a whole?
Um, well, I think that art in general, it creates the responsibility among artists to bring people together. Um, art has always been used as kind of a political statement, maybe not by every artist, but art has always been used as certain artists' ability to share their voice and their thoughts, and to make people question the way of thinking, and to make people ask questions about where these people came from and what their history is, and it offers the space for learning and understanding, and it offers pause to a lot of people from the chaos of life. I think having a more inclusive ballet environment means that we're telling everyone's story. It means that people can go into the ballet. Everyone can go into the ballet and take that pause that the gives you, without having that moment where you get taken out of that breath of air, like, wait, nobody looks like me, I don't belong here, why am I in this audience? um, I think that having a stage full of people that represent the same community of people that you see walking down the street is the only way for any sort of art to be valid today. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It is so powerful. You know, it causes conversations to start that otherwise wouldn't. And
Yeah.
what you were just saying reminds me of the power of inspiration. People talk about inspiration like, oh, it's cute, you feel good, whatever. But
Mhm.
really, inspiration, it ignites the imagination to expand what you think is possible. And it gives you that emotional response to actually start fulfilling that ideal of what is possible. And when you described having a moment as an audience member of color, when you're like, wait, no one looks like me, I almost imagined also that inspiration not feeling like it belongs to you. That
Yeah.
belief, that idea, that dream, it's not for me.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just here.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what would be possible if more um, Black and brown and audience members of all colors um, in all situations in life beyond just race, if they were able to see a ballet that looks like that inspiration is for them, it's an invitation to them to believe that more is possible for them, I believe that could just uplift all of us, like society and culture at large.
Yeah. And I think that maybe you articulated what I was trying to say a little bit better, but yeah, that it's just we need to make this a more inclusive environment in order for it to be relevant.
This is true for ballet to survive as well.
Yeah.
Very true. Well, Chyrstyn, you shared so much wisdom, and I'm so grateful that you came onto the channel just to share your story, your perspective, and to honestly take on the challenge of some of these really tough questions. So, thank you so, so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, internet hugs. Thank you again.